We're good to go. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron McKeithen, and on behalf of the Duke-Margolis Center of Healthcare Policy, I'm very pleased to welcome you all, both here, those of you who are here live and around the world on our webcast. We're excited to have the fourth in the series of discussions about health and healthcare reform, healthcare innovation. I want to recognize and thank our ongoing partnership with Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. I learned some facts when I was preparing for this about the history of Duke and Blue Cross and their connection there. Duke University and Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. This is, maybe I should have asked this as a pop quiz, but anybody knows about this. They have a nearly century-old relationship beginning with the first dean of Duke's School of Medicine. Anybody know who that is? Probably someone on, okay, we got a winner on the front row. W.C. Davison, MD. Dr. Davison spearheaded the creation of Durham's so-called Hospital Care Association, which became Blue Cross North Carolina in 1933. So give Eric our prize. Congratulations. So today, the Duke-Margolis Center and Blue Cross of North Carolina are working together to reform healthcare delivery and payment. Those of you who are been around North Carolina a while know that Blue Cross's vision is to be a national model for transforming the health system, and they're well on their way in doing that. The Duke-Margolis Center for Health Policy's mission is to improve health and the value of healthcare through practical, innovative, and evidence-based policy solutions. So you're part here today of a series called The Point of Care. This is a new monthly speaker series sponsored by Duke-Margolis and Blue Cross of North Carolina. And this provides a national stage for thought leaders like Anish in healthcare delivery, payment, and reform to share ideas, discuss new approaches, and comment on emerging health reforms. Now tonight, we have, I guess, the ninth, is it, Democratic presidential debate. It'll be interesting. There are new people coming in, et cetera. But to be sure, healthcare will be on the agenda and is on the agenda. And all the good ideas in healthcare have at its foundation information and data. And so today we're going to make data. We're going to make data a centerpiece of our conversation. It is a great enabler, and if we can't figure out how to share data and use it effectively, none of the good ideas that anyone talks about in healthcare reform are possible. And so if you're not a data nerd, you will be at the end of today, I assure you. And for that topic, given all this interest in this topic and given policy activity ongoing in this arena, and lots going on in the marketplace, we could think of no better speaker than today's. Anish Chopra was the first White House chief technology officer, and during the Obama administration, had the great fortune of learning from him, and when I was in the federal government as well, and being part of the Anish bandwagon. There's a diaspora of people around the country who've had a chance to work with him and are taking their ideas and their energies in the private sector and in government. So we're really glad to have you. He is the president of Care Journey, which is an open data membership service, which is building a trusted, transparent rating system for physicians, networks, facilities, and markets on the move to value. So I'm going to sit down in just 1 second, and we're going to hear from Anish, but let me conclude by just telling you that the next Point of Care event will be coming up soon on March 4th, and our speaker will be Daniel Stein, who's founder and CEO of InBold, a data analytics company that is creating a new standard of healthcare quality, and you will see more information, more tweets, more emails about that one and future seminar speakers coming up. So now, would you join me in welcoming Anish Chopra? Anish?
So Aaron and I have decided that we're going to have a conversation and we're going to have your involvement in it, but I'm going to do a bit of opening remarks just to sort of set the stage. And if you'll indulge me, this is going to be a very exciting time in healthcare delivery reform, and I couldn't think of a better place than to come to North Carolina, where so many incredible initiatives are underway. So there's a sort of humility in the thankful that you are all moving this ball forward, and maybe a bit of an educational session about what's possible in the art of data and technology and innovation that can be brought to bear. I will say that while I served in the Obama administration, this topic is bipartisan. I will say that the Trump administration has picked up exactly where we left off, and has really put the pedal to the metal. There's, in the words of the current leadership in the Trump community who are focused on this issue, there's a generational consensus that we have to open up and modernize, and that independently of what outcome you're trying to accomplish or the ideology in terms of the use of this information that we might find divergence in, but as to the bedrock of the sort of shining light on the system as it exists today, massive bipartisan support. What I'll do is kind of frame this in the context of privacy, security, and data liquidity. So I've thought of this topic as opening up while locking down. There's a perception that many have in the most recent sort of political kerfuffle around the rules that are going to govern this model. There's a perception that there's a trade-off, that the more data we release, the less privacy and security we'll have, and that somehow we're making a very difficult choice between doing the right thing by empowering patients and the people and families and institutions they trust, as well as the desire to keep our very sensitive information protected from ne'er-do-wells that are often attacking the system by the day. I want to convey to you at the front end of this conversation that, again, bipartisan, but also it is possible, and in fact, the current path to both open up and lock down in a way that it's not today. So just keep a couple of these items of disbelief. And the third principle I want to convey to you is tech, data, and innovation don't operate in a silo. They need to operate in a business model that ensures that the organization and use of this information is for the betterment of the patient. And the reason why I'm in North Carolina and excited about the invitation to address you today is you've done more to get the business model and economic model right, and now the opportunity is to sort of think through how the national movement on data might be brought to bear in the context of a place that's moving the policy the right way. So big picture theory of change. When I was a chief technology officer, my responsibilities were obviously broader than healthcare specific. And I would say the biggest responsibility was the sort of economic thesis for the next 50 plus years, what President Obama called the strategy for American innovation. And the basic principle is this: we're 5% of the global population, we're 25% of the GDP, global GDP. Is that going to shrink in the future, or will it grow? Will it stable? What is our role in the world? Okay, and if you look at the industries of the future, many of those industries have at their core some digital dimension. Artificial intelligence, 5G infrastructure, take your pick of enabling ingredients. And there's bipartisan concern in Washington that we may not be investing enough to compete in these industries of the future. Well, in a fixed pie world where you have $1 spent on X means you can't spend $1 on Y, we don't have a lot of bipartisan agreement to double the size of the government, we find ourselves grappling with where are we allocating resources that are insufficient or inefficient, and might we redeploy those resources towards our economic competitiveness. Healthcare is an area where both political parties believe there's room for basically cost inflation containment. If the healthcare sector's growth rate was simply constrained to the overall economy, GDP plus 0, that would free up enough capital for the US to reinvest and be globally competitive. That's basically the trade-off. So the objective on both sides of the aisle is GDP plus 0. Now, there are two ways to do that. Put healthcare on a budget. On the left, we would call that Medicare for all, right? Which effectively would mean price constraint. And on the right, you would call that Medicaid block grant. Either way, you're capping, and you're hoping the system's going to figure it out. The religious movement I'm a part of is on the other side, that somehow we can achieve better care at lower cost. And that religious movement today is a public-private collaboration, open community. But it remains religious in the current state because we don't have enough evidence to demonstrate that the models work. It's still early days. So I will generally say better care at lower cost, with one caveat. Aaron and I serve on the board of the Healthcare Cost Institute, and we're reminded in every event, in the commercial economy, healthcare economy, it's the price is stupid, is the parallel to the old Obama, sort of the Bill Clinton campaign analogy. So we do have a pricing problem in the commercial markets, but leaving that to the side, there's a utilization opportunity in the government-sponsored. What is the call to action? If we opened up information about how well or not well the system performs, and it's surprisingly opaque. We may have a high-level understanding that we have waste in the system, and we look at papers and studies that say a third of the system is waste or what have you, but it's hard to drill down to the doctor level or the patient level to understand what does that actually mean. Opaque. If we opened up more data, we could shine light on what that looks like. If we could adjust the incentive system, we might align the delivery model to root out that waste. And ideally, if we could upgrade the level of decision support, not internal to a silo, how to make a hospital more efficient or how to make a clinic more efficient or a home care agency more efficient, but how to help route patients more thoughtfully through the system. If we could do those three things, then the religious movement will have accomplished its objective. We're going to have evidence and we can scale that evidence. We're not there yet. This year, we're going to have, I think, we're entering the final steps of the legal and technical foundation for this new economy. It doesn't solve it. It just sets the rules of the road. And now we're going to move as a country towards implementation. There are two aspects where this data revolution has a public policy dimension. One, CMS itself holds a vast treasure trove of information on the Medicare and Medicaid systems. It was illegal in the Obama administration. It was illegal prior to the Obama administration for the government to release that information. Even if I wanted to look up how much money did Medicare pay Dr. Huang, right? It's taxpayer dollars, writing a check, right? It was deemed a privacy violation for Dr. Huang to disclose how much money Medicare paid Dr. Huang. We've come full circle. Between the Obama administration and the Trump administration, we've been on a steady move where by this time next year, the claims history on 120 million Americans will be safely and securely accessible by the public to learn what works and what doesn't. Imagine all these shady, dark money data company business models where they've sort of captured a little bit here, a little bit there, bundled it up, and said, hey, I've got windows of information about healthcare. Now we can go right through the front door and have opportunities to learn what works and what doesn't in an open and transparent way to have a dialogue about where we can make it better. The news, the tweet here is the news that in November, CMS finally and formally announced that the 70 million Medicaid lives will be accessible for research or access for the first time ever this year. The second argument is, again, I'm presenting this in tweets because policy in this era is now by tweet. The second area is that individual beneficiaries should have the right to be able to access their health information and connect it with whatever institution or app they trust. And you could see that during open enrollment for Medicare Advantage, the tweet here from May, if you have difficulty shopping for a health plan, quote unquote, tedious research, don't worry. There are over 50 blue button apps live and in production today on the CMS App Store, all of whom are free, that could compete on helping you make sense of that information. Humana, disclosure, I work with Humana. Humana is one of the more aggressive in embracing these capabilities. CMS went live in August of 2018, and by open enrollment that year, Humana had already gotten live. They basically said, if you're shopping for a prescription drug plan online, what happens to the shopper? They get to the page that says, please enter all the drugs that you're on, and I can give you an estimated out-of-pocket cost. What was the most frequent, my mom and dad go through this every year, open enrollment. What's their most frequent skip this step, right? It's annoying. Americans sort by premium, not by estimated out-of-pocket cost. And the economists say that the average senior spends $500 a year more in drugs than if they picked the better plan. What an indictment of the decision support system. You know, if Amazon was graded on how well it recommended products to me and they routed me to a $500 worse option, they would not be the trillion-dollar plus company they are today. And yet we tolerate a healthcare system that knowingly routes seniors to pay $500 more than they needed to because they have to manually enter their drugs. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Well, when Humana launched this service, they had 10 days left before the end of open enrollment, and 10,000 people authorized the preloading of the drug history into the Humana shopping app so it would do it for them. And they haven't disclosed the conversion rates, but I can tell you it is north of double digits in conversion rates, people who buy a plan that's right for them after they've pushed blue button than when they go in cold. So we're just at the starting line. This idea, and Aaron and I are going to get into this a little bit, I think, in the conversation, but this idea that the consumer should have the right to access their information and to connect it with whomever they trust, that is going to be law of the land across all doctors, hospitals, and for the first time, health plans. Government-sponsored health plans, Medicare Advantage, qualified health plans on healthcare.gov, Medicaid managed care, and in North Carolina, Medicaid fee-for-service. CMS hasn't announced the date that everyone has to be live, but betting markets, and I'll let Aaron join me in the prediction markets, I'm betting it's going to be 1/1/21. 9 months. This is going to be a sea change in data liberation. And it's really funny. For those of you that are interested in public policy, we had a rulemaking process around this, and June was the deadline of last year where comments were submitted. And they're public comments. And so people like me have fun reading the public comments. And 99% of the health systems and health plans who filed comments basically said this: oh, it's too hard, it's technically complicated, I don't know what to do, security, it's gonna be difficult, we can't do this, delay the rules, complicated, blah, blah, blah. And oh, cry me a river. 2 health plans, to their credit, wrote into the rules, Cambia and Humana, again, disclosure, I work with both, saying, the water is warm. We're in. We want to work with you to make these systems work better. We want to collaborate with you on how to make it right. But basically, we're in. By the way, for the complexity and the difficulty and the stress people have about going live, Aaron can tell you, a small team of people contracted by Medicare, a couple of whom represented in this room, basically formed the digital SEAL team, SEAL Team 6. And they were able to do it for Medicare at a fraction of what people expect the cost of this thing to be. And they went live on legacy 1970s era Mac systems that just basically stitch together and work. And they've built beautiful, modern, digital capabilities. The water is warm. We're not inventing blockchain. There's no machine learning and AI. We're not inventing a new form of physics. We're applying the same basic technologies that have been fueling the internet economy for a decade, and we're bringing them to healthcare. That's basically it. So that was June. After the shaming of all these letters being public, and I think a lot of organizations were like, ooh, I'm kind of embarrassed that we kind of said that we couldn't do this. Like, that's pretty awkward. So a month later, the White House held its second Blue Button Developer Conference. And at that stage, dozens of health plans, health systems, big tech. This is the Chief Digital Officer at Humana, Heather Cox, who sort of was the face of this movement, raised their hands and said, we are going to voluntarily test the technical standards this year, even before the regulations take effect. That was 1 month of difference. Woe is me to people standing on stage and saying we're in. Then, an obvious question. If we're going to make it easy for consumers to use apps to connect to their data, no BAAs, no 6-month implementation, no massive integration costs, why can't we use that same technology so that doctors and hospitals and nursing homes can connect as well? Health plans. Like, it makes no sense to build this beautiful data sharing world for consumers and still rely on the messy, cumbersome, faulty, creaky systems that fuel the day-to-day. So on the same day, at the same event, we organized a second announcement. About a half a dozen health systems and a half a dozen health plans stood on stage and said, you know what, we're going to take the consumer standards called the FHIR API, and we're going to package them in bulk for what you would traditionally think of as business-to-business communication. By the way, Blue Cross North Carolina signed on, the state of North Carolina signed on, and a number of leading organizations have signed on. And now we have an opportunity to modernize, rip the Band-Aid, modernize in the internet era how the plumbing and the healthcare delivery system is going to work. Now, we're going to spend a lot more time on sort of culture change and business model and everything else, and we'll get into some of that with Aaron. But let me just, at the highlight, say one of the most fundamental problems we have is data governance. I reported to the President of the United States. IT did not report to me. The idea behind the role was that technology, data, and innovation are not being properly deployed to address the challenges of national security and economic growth and health and education. And that the president wanted to have someone reporting directly to the president to ensure horizontally that we had capability that could swoop in and give advice where we had experts in health, experts in energy, experts in areas all across the economy, but may not have been equally deploying the technical component. I think that role is coming to healthcare. And a face of that role is Andrew Kasarsis, the Chief Digital Officer at Mount Sinai. Andrew reports directly to the president of Mount Sinai Health System in New York, not to the CIO. The CIO's got a long and very storied role. They got to keep the information secure. That's job one. They got to get the systems running, uptime, and they've got to manage a portfolio and a budget. So cost effectiveness, security, and uptime, that's more than a full-time job for an entire team. Think about the billions of dollars the country has invested to digitize the health information. Who's knocking on the door to say, hey, Eric, I have data. What can you do with it? Hey, Aaron, I'm thinking about a new way of integrating the home care delivery model with the physician's office. How do we want to use information? Who is the chief sales operation to put this information to use? So the role that Andrew holds and the role that I think will scale across healthcare will be a person whose responsibility in this era is to ensure that the data is accessible and used in hopefully standardized, easy to use methods. Effectively a data app store or a data store. And Andrew, this is not a graphic that is meant for anyone's eyes, it's embarrassing, but it's kind of ugly. But the basic principle is there are going to be all these data sources, health plan data, EHR data, other data. They're all going to communicate on the internet with something called the FHIR server. That is the way to think about this is there's a plug in the wall, And you and I, we have millions of devices we can plug into the wall, and we get a consistent feed of power to fuel our products. So there's no, my iPhone plugs into this wall, but the Android doesn't. There's none of that weirdness, right? You plug it into the wall, it's a standard, and everyone uses it. We don't have plugs for health data in anyone's walls. Every single time you want data, you got to drill a hole in the wall, grab the wire, connect it, and then feed. Once. Hospitals and health systems health plans, they have to maintain hundreds, thousands of these one-off feeds. Well, this fancy little icon, HL7 Fire, is healthcare's plug. And it's going to be required of every EHR and every health plan over the next 12 months. Then the question is, if I've got a plug, now I want to put rules of the road in place. If you're a consumer app, you have the right to touch that plug. Does Blue Cross have the right to hit the Duke plug? Maybe. It'll be constrained. Maybe for patients that a risk contract has been stood up, but not for patients outside of the risk contract. So you might want to put like a valet key to your car. This key opens up the ignition and the glove compartment, but not the trunk. This key opens up the trunk. So people like Andrew are going to be negotiating the development of keys that control access to the plug. The plug's the same, but we're going to manage access. The VA calls this the Digital Veteran Platform. Even though they've purchased Cerner, and that's the big news, there's actually a ton of opportunity for them to share information with the private sector, for health networks that basically extend that data out of Cerner and into whatever the environment the veteran trusts and whatever the environment the doctor's office operates in. In the interest of time, I'm just going to summarize the next just little bit of it so you could quickly get a flavor. I'm introducing a term today that I think is going to be central to the discussion we're going to have about opening up and locking down. And it is a term called fiduciary. In healthcare, we would call that the Hippocratic Oath. So call this the digital Hippocratic Oath. The idea is that as we build these plugs and we create baseline rights that a consumer can connect any app they trust to that plug, we want to make sure that the apps that consumers have the option to choose adhere to some code of conduct, some principle. I would love that to be a fiduciary concept. There's no legal requirement it be, but the spirit of it is, if I'm entrusting you with my data, I'm expecting that the advice you're going to give me on my data will be in my best interest, not in the best interest of the sponsor of the app who's hosting it. You may have read in the news the story of the EHR company Practice Fusion, where they put a decision support system in that was advising doctors to prescribe opioids, maybe when the patient didn't need it. So that would be an example of the not fiduciary, right? Because I assume they got paid money from the pharma companies to basically promote the opioid product. That's not great. So we're going to have to figure out a way to establish these rules of the road for a fiduciary. But look at the tools the fiduciaries will have access to. I'll summarize them here, and then we'll quickly get into the discussion. They're going to be able to get the data access, starting with a little bit of data that we're going to standardize, but the pace with which the data, the electronic health record is going to be available will not be set by the US government. They set the floor. It'll be set by Eric talking to Blue Cross North Carolina. And the two of them are going to set the pace car about how much of the health information in the record will flow through the plug. Right now, the government's going to regulate a very small amount of that data go through the plug, and it hopefully should be the rest of the medical record. That's a big reason why the political debate is we're in a huge fight, is how much data flows through the plug. The second thing is we are going to build an economy of substitutable apps. So right now, we have the one app to rule them all. I bought a medical record software system for my practice. You got to connect to it and it alone. It is the thing. Well, no longer. Now I can add an app for billing, and I can add an app for patient nudges, and I can add an app for appointment scheduling optimization. I can bring in substitutable apps. Third, with all the data that's now being made available, how can we apply that information to score whether or not a particular physician, practice group, or network, or geographic region is routing people thoughtfully through the system? How much unnecessary care is routing through Dr. A, B, C, or D? And then last but not least, and the most exciting change in the new rules, proposed rules, consumers with decision support that advises them to get better care at lower cost can now be rewarded by making smarter decisions. And for the nerds in the room, the gain sharing paid to consumers for making smarter choices counts towards the MLR, which means there's now an economic case for the plans to invest in that decision support, which today is super lousy, but tomorrow is going to be really personalized because now there's an economic model that will fuel it. So what do these things look like? It means Apple Health. Apple, I'm a big fan of Apple, but it doesn't mean only Apple. I love this because Apple decided that they were going to choose the open standard and not create an Apple plug. I'm grateful that Apple did not make an Apple plug to compete with an Android plug. So now we have one plug, right? Everybody, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, everyone and their mother is agreeing on a single plug. We're not going to fight over the plug. No Betamax VHS issues in healthcare data. Toast. We cut it off. And to make it easy, Apple keeps a website of who's live. Look at the first doctor who's live on Apple Health. Richard M. Adams of Family Foot Care of Texas. Anyone guess the size of Richard M. Adams of Family Foot Care of Texas's IT budget? Yeah, nothing, right? It's got to be plug and play. The irony of ironies is it's often the bigger institutions that have gajillions of dollars that feel like this is way too complicated and way too expensive, and they forget that Richard M. Adams is able to go live today. The second point here is that we're entering this era of substitutable apps I mentioned. Again, in disclosure, I work with MedStar. MedStar is building an EHR-agnostic risk calculator with the American College of Cardiology so you could track who's at risk of a heart attack. This completely free app went into production over the holidays. That means any doctor, theoretically, in North Carolina could download this app, partner with Blue Cross North Carolina, and have an active surveillance model for people at risk of a heart attack. Million Hearts, Aaron, one of the biggest public health priorities of the country. Completely free, completely open source, right? How many doctors have downloaded that app or even know that it's possible? CMS has said we're going to give every doctor in the country the ability to access 4 years of claims history on any patient they treat live. Well, it's in beta right now, but they announced it in July. 116,000 doctors have set up on the CMS website that they would like to access and participate in the program. How many other health plans offer the same service? Third, here in North Carolina, Jesse Tannenbaum, the chief data scientist, we've got the screening program for the SDOH questions. The problem right now is it's sort of limited by vendors. So if Duke wants to deploy the screening model sponsored by North Carolina, they'd have to turn on the software sponsored and paid for by the state, and it's a big process and it takes time. Well, thanks to Jesse's leadership and Aaron's and Mark McClellan's and others, there's a completely free NIH-funded app that any doctor can download and use in their practice that can incorporate the screening questions for the SDOH pilot and share a copy with the state and keep a copy in the EHR. These are all technical capabilities that can scale with the ease at which this stuff shows up in our phones. We are starting to build rating systems. This is what I do for a living at Care Journey. We tap into the national CMS data sets. I blanked this physician's name, but it's a practicing orthopedic surgeon. You can look at how many patients this person's treated for rheumatoid arthritis and osteoporosis, and whether the total cost of care for that treatment, risk-adjusted, mix-adjusted, is better or worse than peers in the neighborhood, looking at some of the avoidable admissions and other quality statistics. All of this is computable on open data. We'd have to pay some weird, shady, back office company to like secretly pull the stuff together. Front door. We're asked to define prices in healthcare. So instead of, you go to the Duke website, no offense, Eric, but I bet you if I looked up your charge master, it's going to be hundreds of thousands of the aspirin costs us this and this costs me that. So CMS funded a multi-million-dollar Brandeis program called the Episode Grouper Model. Completely free, completely open source. We can now group together a common definition for how to handle colon cancer. What's the cost of the diagnosis, the cost of the surgery, the ongoing radiation, and the monitoring costs? We can now speak a common language. So we're not saying this is the Blue Cross definition of it, this is the hospital definition of it, this is whatever's definition of it. We can all speak the same language. And that's my final statement about the gain sharing. Instead of apps for healthy people, we're going to start to see apps routing those who have complex chronic conditions to route more thoughtfully through the delivery system. None of these capabilities will reach the hands of patients unless we have economic models that drive it. And this gain sharing provision and the overall move to value are critical ingredients. North Carolina has got the rules of the road set better than any other state. You're moving to value-based care faster at scale. It's an opportunity to be the test bed for how these new technical capabilities and standards can be put to work to help patients, physicians, plans, care managers coordinate that care. It's up to North Carolina to bring this to life and showcase for the rest of the country what's in the art of the possible. I can't wait to see what you do. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, my friend.
Please.
I put that last slide up because I assume we're going to get into some of this stuff on privacy and security, so we'll reference that as we talk, but we'll get into this.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Who's
sir.
gonna win the election?
Yeah.
Don't answer that.
It's
Don't
going to be a lot of fun. The good news is this subject is bipartisan, so no matter who wins, this machine is going to continue.
Excellent. Okay, so look how many questions I have for you. So many questions. But I'm going to ask 3, and then I'm going to invite you all to ask your questions. So if you have a question, tee it up. Let's start with my home state, North Carolina. You just referenced, you sort of building on your last comments, and I appreciated particularly your comment that we're at the beginning stages of this.
Yeah.
We have generated lots of national attention in North Carolina for innovative payment models and new ways of sharing information in the private sector, moving to value and hopefully value-based managed care at some point in the public sector under Manny Cohen's leadership. Those are a lot of announcements, and there's a lot of work to do ahead. So we've sort of nailed the announcements. We've got some initial steps and initial sort of agreements with systems to move to value, et cetera. But the question I have is, like, can you just say more about what you see from Virginia,
Yeah.
you see down here, and help us not lose hope that these steps are hard and they're going to take a while, and moving beyond the announcements to actually implementation is just the kind of messy labyrinth that we are experiencing.
Yeah, so the reason I swim in my lane, Aaron, and my lane is sort of tech and data, and we are in service to a demand signal. So if you said to me right now, what is the demand signal in healthcare in 95% of the country? Billing, coding, sort of back office operations. So the most advanced uses of technology, data, and innovation are all about how do I accurately collect all the revenue that's owed me for the services I've just delivered. That's basically the demand signal today. So despite all the things that I've just shared, absent the demand signal for actually routing people thoughtfully through the delivery system, which is not a demand signal, we are going to keep putting the best of our tech around the stuff that really, candidly, does not lead to better outcomes. The hope and prayer of North Carolina is by putting these announcements and then contracts. The key thing is contracts. When you've signed a value-based care contract and you've got the Blues plus Medicare and Medicaid in this state, theoretically, this state should have the loudest demand signal for how do I communicate more thoughtfully with other stakeholders in service to the patient. Let's just take a simple one. If we capitate primary care, just for the sake of discussion, something akin to a capitation model, now the physicians on the front lines who's extraordinarily busy for the 7-minute visit to collect all the information, now they may say, you know what, it is a lot more cost effective if I could communicate with patients in the home. Maybe I communicate with patients in the home directly because they're going to answer survey questions like how are you feeling today, basically promise 10, these outcome scores, and then that could be a factor in prioritizing, not when you naturally come to see me in the office, but when I'm going to call to communicate with you because I think there's a changing condition that's going to merit my intervention. Capitating primary care should be the building block, the basis of a new building block of demand signal on what it is that their primary care doctor is going to want. Now, they might say, I don't really want to have a direct, I don't want to be text messaging my patient. I'm not there yet, but I'm happy to have the patient with a home care aide and be an extension of my delivery. So the demand signal might be, let's equip the home care aides in the state to kind of get after those frail elders and coordinate in a more efficient manner. I don't know the demand signal, Aaron. My bet is the contracts should result in a more organized demand signal. The dream is to find the institutions, the geographies in the state that have taken Medicaid risk, Medicare risk, and Blue Cross risk. If we find any primary care clinic in the state that's doing that, I would say, take these cameras, let's all just listen to the physician's workflow and desires. Hug them. Yeah. And learn, because that's going to be the roadmap for what the industry should be building. So no pressure, but let's at least get folks who are going to internalize these contracts and organize that demand signal. That's what I'm hoping for. I don't think there's any technical leadership out of North Carolina. No offense. I don't think you need to invent anything. You have RTP and you could invent things, but that's not what the country is looking for you to do. It's a thoughtful, organized, not hoped for demand signal, but in reality demand signal.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I wanted to ask a question about a word, interoperability, that is not maybe the most fashionable word these days.
No, it's terrible.
But I want to ask you to comment within your lane of data and innovation, how docs are experiencing their electronic health records. So if on the one hand, we're trying to build these fire plugs and get people excited about the potential. On the other hand, we have beleaguered nurses and docs who stare at screens and are frustrated and so on. I just wonder how are you seeing that play out? And
So this is the timing problem. So let me say, this is a story in 3 acts. Yeah. Let's start with act number 1. When we showed up early 09, end of 08, of course the economic crisis compelled the country to invest to get us out of the crisis. It was President Obama's leadership, and I think political partisanship aside, he had to make a decision. He chose to take $100 billion of the $700+ billion recovery package, and we called it the Reinvestment and Recovery Act. So he had a judgment to make in weeks. And I think the judgment was, let's invest in areas that are maybe a little bit early, but are going to be infrastructure for the future. And there had been a hope and a prayer leading up to this, bipartisan hope and a prayer, and a lot of academic studies about this, that if we digitize the system, moved from pen and paper, we could reduce duplicate testing, increase quality of care, definitely boost care coordination, a lot of hypotheses. So with a lot of those assumptions, we moved ahead. And because of the Recovery Act needing to put money into the hands of people immediately, we basically said to the industry, we're going to be giving you more money now to incrementally improve upon what you've done, but no misunderstanding, please plan for, this is going to be a multi-year process where we're going to want to get to the universal plug. We didn't have a name for it, but we were going to get there. and that we're going to be expecting the industry to work with us. You're going to get paid a lot to do a little, but that investment is supposed to carry over basically a decade, was kind of the deal. So point one, there was this economic model that looking backwards, you might say, geez, who pays their contractor all the money up front and hopes the house gets built to their desires after the fact? Like, geez, you should have like held out. No. We were in an economic crisis, so we had to spend. So point number one is understand the context for the interoperability state of play. Point two, what gave us hope was the VA. So let's just take a second. We talked about blood pressure control. The VA in the Washington area had taken veterans, about 28, maybe 30% of veterans that were hypertensive had their blood pressure controlled. And we have medications that can, so this should not be a 28% thing. This should be like a universal thing, right? That's the Million Hearts program. And in the course of about 18 months, they went from, call it 30% to like 80%. And I maybe get the numbers a little bit off, but you're like, whew, hockey stick. What happened, Aaron? What happened was interoperability-ish. They put out a policy that said no matter where a veteran seeks care, record the blood pressure and share it. What service do most veterans access in the VA? Mental health. So today's mental health practitioners don't track blood, it's not a routine in the course of care. They became the single biggest referral because they would collect the blood pressure, the software would integrate it, interoperability, into the longitudinal record, note a change, and then an alert would pop up, please direct them to internal medicine for a consult. And that proactive, I'm here for counseling, I'm not here to check my blood pressure, but that coordinated care, complex care. So we had evidence base that if we could collect information anywhere and everywhere, and there was trust, we should be able to surface really the kind of the cracks that we are falling through today. So the promise of interoperability was that a Duke physician treating a North Carolina patient, UNC, they may be bitter rivals on the basketball court, but they may want to collaborate to make sure that this information is there. So that point two is a theory, and that leads me to the point three, which is the depression. So this gets back to a number of factors. We're going to call it the demand signal. When we did the beginnings of the plug, when you were in the government, we said, look, Eric records his health information into his website at Duke one way. The practitioners at Duke do it another way. And really, when you bought an IT system, it was basically a filing cabinet in the digital realm. There was not a lot of structured field. In fact, the CIO of Partners Healthcare in Boston, Harvard, Mass General, gods, they basically said, we've had 30 years of medical records. I can't pull a list of patients who smoke. John Glasser, legendary, godfather. Not because Partners is somehow foolish, they didn't understand the engineering. It's that was not what the systems were designed to solve. They were designed to make sure that the encounter was captured and that the encounter note and whatever was resulting in some type of billing or what have you. So we said, Aaron, that you've got to record a minimum dozen or so data elements. You got to record the blood pressure in a structured way, your lab values in a structured way, the medications list in a structured way. And we said, look, the country's going to eventually get to tumor progression in a standardized way. But the government can't force the country to do that. We have to self-organize. Mm-hmm. So, because in the US, we rely on the private sector to build standards, not the government. It's an important distinction. In China, they could have just been like, you know what? This is it. Here's the master list. I don't care what software you use, but you're going to record tumor progression here, blah, blah, this information here, imaging studies here. No. We did not have that authority, and that's not a US way. So the frustration we saw in healthcare was when we did meaningful use, mental health providers like, why do I have to record blood pressure? It's taking 5 more minutes out of my time. I have to have a nurse enter data. It doesn't affect my care. It may help the patient. They don't say it in those words, but it doesn't help me. I'm the one that's got to hire these people and put them on payroll on a reimbursement model that ain't paying me for that. So, Aaron, we became more of a compliance, do the minimum necessary to check the box to meet the government rules, not let's form a committee to think through what is the best way to organize this. And why would we stop at the dozen things? We published the list of the dozen things in January of 2010. January of 2019, on the eve of the CMS rule, Seema Varma, we were on stage at HIMSS announcing this concept, and she's making the statement like, I'm a Republican who's a deregulatory, patience over paperwork. I'm about to impose the biggest regulatory smackdown on data. This is the analogy in my mind of Jefferson buying the Louisiana Purchase, right? Small government conservative, doubles the size of the country. She's like, this is, in a way, how many data elements in the medical record did the country, private sector led, add to the dozen we mandated in January of 2010? Louder. Zero. That tells you something about a market failure. Now, before we get, again, interoperability, you set up an easy question. I'm giving you a long answer, but I just want to give you some context.
Yep.
Also in the Recovery Act, we put maybe $10+ billion into smart meters, right? Duke Power Company, as an example, where they said, in the old days, they had these analog meters and people have to come to your house, check the meter, and you get a bill. These smart meters are connected to the internet, not really, private networks, but whatever, and they can communicate 7-minute increments, 15-minute increments. That's a lot of data stream. And by the way, we're going to be building electric cars, and electric cars have to get electricity. Aaron, if I come to visit you and I bring my electric car and I plug my car into your house, are you having to pay my bill to charge my car? Interoperability, is there a way that I could charge the energy consumption about that to my house? Mm-hmm. So exact same analogy, the government said, let's do these 10 minimum things in the energy sector. Where did they end up in the decade? Basically, everything is interoperable. They sat down and said, thanks, government. We don't have to have an ONC that's beating us up. We don't need to have a regulation that's going to force this. You know what? We should make it so that the plug, physical plug that gets into the Volt is the same plug that goes into a Prius, is the same plug that goes into a Tesla. And oh, by the way, it should be interoperable, and I should be able to bill it to my house. I should be able to do this, that, and the other. The industry self-organized. We did put a working group together at NIST. We funded it $10 million to organize meetings and collaboration and whatnot, but the industry invested. In the banking sector, in Dodd-Frank, we said, hey, I should be able to take the data from my checking account and give it to any app I trust that could give me advice on consumer finance and mint.com and blah, blah, blah. The US government never had to issue the reg. It went into the rule, and the industry adopted. Only healthcare has had this problem, and partially it's the demand signal. Why should the mental health clinic take this responsibility for the betterment of the patient when no one's going to reward them for this? So we've had a compliance, and even the word interoperability just oozes gross, compliance, lose. So let's drop the word interoperability. We're going to call it substitutability of apps, app substitutability. And that's a Ken Mandel, Zach Cohane team at Harvard to talk through this. Because as North Carolina moves the demand signal, that mental health clinic is going to realize that mental health issues combined with diabetes and hypertension, I bet, and I'm sure the Blue Cross people in the room will say, if we tackled mental health in a more effective way, we could cut the medical cost even though that's not the direct service that we're offering, because we're going to coordinate the care. Putting a case manager in mental health or integrating it into primary care is a reward. So now that very same person's like, oh, compliance and blood pressure. Wait a minute. I might get a piece of the bonus if we can overall reduce the cost of the system. I'll put resources at that, right? You're going to have that demand signal. So interoperability, now here's the issue. Your demand signal is going to be really small. So when Eric is one customer of an EHR system at Duke, calls the EHR system and says, no, I want all these fancy features. They're going to say today, sure, buddy, you want to go deviate from our main product, you pay for it. Hire the engineers, do the stuff. You have a whole army of people at Duke that build fire apps. Go have at it. We're doing our thing, you do your thing. It doesn't reach the demand signal of, okay, release number 3 in the product offering this year is going to add those features because that North Carolina SDOH questionnaire, instead of having custom implementations of that at every EHR, hey, let's just load that fire app as an option to plug in. And if North Carolina wants to have 10 versions, if Blue Cross wants to have a version, Duke wants a version, a logo on it, picture of a hoops on it, whatever. Do whatever you want. Personalize the app. Let it be drag and drop. So the negative word of, oh, this is burdensome interoperability, I have to enter things I don't want, with the demand signal and the technical rollout, if we get that trifecta aligned, then we should be in a position where we can actually achieve the ambition. Otherwise, it's going to cost him X million dollars to complete. Ask yourself the administrative costs for value-based care. Benchmark it. Mm-hmm. If we think we spend a lot on fee-for-service administrative costs, double it or triple it for administrative costs for value-based care. We're each having to create our own dashboards and data loads, and the file from Humana looks different than the file from Blue Cross, looks different than the file from CMS, looks different from the file from Epic and Cerner and Athena. Are you kidding me? So we have to be better organized. And it's partially the government saying with these rules, enough, do it. So now the question is, who's going to organize? And no pressure, but this place has the best business case for interoperability. If we don't do it here, wow, how much faith are we going to have in the rest of the country? So that's why the interoperability negative word hopefully will be a positive to enable these models with the demand signal.
Great. I have one more question. Do you all have questions soon? Okay, here's my last question. I'm going to start with a non-healthcare anecdote, and it's personal to me. So I figure if I'm talking to the Chief Technology Officer that reports to the President of the United States, if you can't solve this for me, Anish.
Yeah.
All right. This is probably true for you too. You get 13,000 emails in your inbox, and 12,000 of them are from entities that sent you stuff you didn't subscribe to.
Yeah.
What do? You scroll down to the bottom and you find the little unsubscribe button.
Yeah.
And then, so you unsubscribe. Usually there's some steps. And then it will ask you this really stupid question, which I hate every time I see that curse, at least in my mind and my heart, which says, well, what's the reason for this?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know who you are. Right. I didn't ask for you.
Yeah.
I didn't want you.
Yeah.
And what I really want to know is, I want you to delete me. I don't want you what I hate is when it says, we've updated your profile. Unsubscribe. I didn't want that. This is just an email.
I'm with you, brother.
So now in healthcare.
If only we had a privacy policy in this country.
Well, that would be nice. So now let's talk about, by the way, thank God for Gmail, because now I can just archive everything and it looks like I have a clean inbox. Okay, blood pressure goes down. But I do think, I want to ask you about healthcare privacy in this respect, right? Because I can't seem, as a consumer of Gmail, I can't seem to stop the octopus of stuff being sent to me, even when I unsubscribe as fast as it comes in.
Correct.
How can I be sure that one of these apps, or my mother, who, I have to kind of teach her how to use her phone every time I see her. God bless you, Mom. How do we help consumers actually turn off apps that don't work? I mean, the whole goal of an ecosystem, right, is
yes.
Some of them are going to work really well. I like this app. I want to use it all the time.
Yes.
This one I try, I don't like it. How can we really make sure that health data is protected? And it's way more important, of course, than just the Gmail spam.
So this is, thank you for that.
I would like you to help me with my Gmail.
Yeah. Well, and this was the last slide that I was taking too long, so I wanted to slow it down. But let me take a minute to sort of set the stage here, because I think it's actually really important. Yeah. Healthcare today has basically an orthogonal approach to privacy. We say we're HIPAA covered, and we think, okay, you're going to be protected from spam. Well, HIPAA was actually only meant as a way to make two organizations have some basis of trust with the consumer to communicate with each other. Once they communicate with each other and they've got a copy of the data, you may be surprised to know, as long as they quote unquote de-identify the data, hospitals, health systems, physicians, many have sold your data today. By the way, I talk to hospital CEOs, health plan CEOs. How dare you say we do this? No way. We steward that data. Oh yeah? That contract you signed with vendor X, in there it says we reserve the right to sell the de-identified data. You agreed to that term, and they offered you a discount to their product to do it. So in effect, your bribe was a discount on an IT product, which resulted in the sale of the data. So then all of a sudden, board of directors are like, are we selling data? Like the irony of ironies is the American Hospital Association, in attacking the regs, said these shady apps that grandma will be duped into authorizing are going to sell grandma's data. You're selling it today. And worse, there's no disclosure. So what's even worse is that when you sell it, and I put in quotes de-identified, it's really easy for that to link up with a Google ad process that you may be targeted, not because your actual PHI is in someone's actual hands, but it's de-identified use linked with other attributes, got close enough to say, I'm going to spam you because I think you may have hypertension. And you're like, how did you know that? My doctor, my hospital, whatever, sold my data to XYZ. So step one is acknowledging, when I said opening up while locking down, step one is today your data is sold by people you supposedly trust. By the way, for anyone in the audience, I would imagine every board of directors should beat down the management team and say, I want a full and complete audit of every contractor who touches our data. Do we have a clause? It's not required. So in the compliance department, they don't put the clause in because it's a minimum compliance. There's no clause. Did we proactively put a clause that prohibits the sale of the de-identified data in our contract? I hope every board of directors does that audit and comes clean on, you know what? We found that a third of our contractors did. Right? So it'd be fun to sort of do an audit like Duke. How often does that happen? You know, UNC, Blue Cross, whoever's in the room. Just curiosity. Has the question even been asked? Second question, privacy. Your grandma in this example, we opened up APIs and consumer rights through CMS, and the most popular service of data access was actually the IRS. We created a program called Get Transcript. 23 million Americans logged into the IRS website. I did it. And you can download in a machine-readable format 3 years of your tax transcript history. By the way, if you're earned income tax credit or whatever, it's really useful to take that to your H&R Block, to forecasting, and helps with your economics.
Did you do it 23 million times? That was you?
That was me. One person, 23 million times. 300,000 people had their credentials stolen. So to the IRS, it was Aaron McKeithen logging in for the Get Transcript when it was really Schmerin Schmeethen, okay? And so privacy-wise, today, we have patient portals all over the system. I will promise you your IT department cannot tell the difference between a machine that logs into your system or a patient. They're not equipped to do that. Browsers are not equipped to authenticate. I say those two statements, Aaron, about baseline. Because now in the new rules, let's now revisit. I co-chair the Caron Alliance. Blue Cross North Carolina is a proud member with Governor Levitt, and you're involved, and we're all involved. And the idea is, what are the rules of the road that consumer apps should abide by? What is the equivalent of what I hope would be a fiduciary, although we couldn't get consensus on the word fiduciary because that's a bit too far. But what basic principles? I want to delete my data, GDPR style. I want to limit its use. I want to control who has access. I want full transparency of what you're going to do. If you're going to sell the de-identified, tell me. Don't do the shady thing the healthcare systems do, and don't tell me. Tell me. So we put a bunch of things in there that go beyond HIPAA. And not only did we say you have to disclose whether you sell de-identified data, but we said that the vendors you use must abide by that policy. We had a couple health plans. We're like, you know that our vendors don't allow us to negotiate that. They're going to jack up our rates like 3x. I'm like, you just put a price on the sale of de-identified data. Thank you. You've just told me how shady black market is for the healthcare data. So the Karen Alliance says with this, now, is it enforceable? Can we mandate that everybody sign the Karen Code? That's a big policy debate. We're going to see where CMS lands on whether or not they would allow there to be some discrimination for apps that don't pledge some base level of privacy to meet the conditions you've outlined. And I think that's going to be a healthy debate. But now this gets to the last point, and it's a technical one. Consumer apps must register with the place that's going to collect the data from them. So that Richard M. Adams of Family Foot Care of Texas, there's a registered set of apps. So if there's a shady Chinese hacker app, we could figure that out as a community. Hey, don't put that app in there, they're shady. So we have the opportunity, unlike a portal, where that hacker app is asking grandma, give me your username and password, I'm going to go log in on your behalf, which you can't tell. Now we can register the app. So opening up while locking down means I'm not actually giving my password to a third-party app. The third-party app is saying, we want permission. Hey, Medicare, you talk directly to Aaron and get the permission, and then just give us a secret token. So we don't actually know Aaron's passwords. We just know the token. And if we're shady in our behavior, cut me off. So that's why opening up while locking down is a central feature. All the political lobbyists that are saying, oh, these rules are going to make us less safe, less secure. I'm like, you fundamentally got wrong the proposal and the technical architecture and the current state. And that's why I'm so bullish we're going to have a better position after the fact. Right?
Great.
All right.
All right.
Feedback, questions, pushback.
Right here.
Let's dive in.
So, just sticking with
Could you just give your name? I think we're going to do let's get a mic on you so that we can hear it on the worldcast. And if you'll tell us your name, rank, and serial number, that'd be great.
sure. Brian Frisch,
I got you.
Okay. Brian Frisch, founder of Transform Consulting, formerly Advisory Board, Remedy Partners. Anish. Just sticking with that. So obviously, I mean, sort of, I don't know if the gorilla is actually in the room, but Epic, right? I mean, there was this huge, pushback from Epic, and 60 health systems signed on, pushing back on privacy issues and concerns. I mean, can you comment on that then?
Of course. So really quickly, so what happened? So by the way, case studies are going to be written about lobbying malpractice. Okay? I love Epic. I think it's if not the best, among the top EHR systems in the country, in the world. And I'm a big fan of the ethic, the culture, the capability, the focus. I actually love the software. So, by the way, in general, I love everybody. So I'm trying to generally speaking, I want to say that. The process-wise, they submitted this lobbying push basically after everything was done. There's not a lot of benefit to doing something after the rule. Basically, the deadline to submit feedback on the rules and to give commentary was June of last year, and then probably had until maybe the end of January. So they chose the last week of the end of the process to start a campaign. Under no political process would that actually result in anything working. Number one. Number two, and this is really interesting, they were claiming all these statements that grandma was going to get duped and unknowingly would be disclosing all this content. By the way, all of that content is available on my chart, and grandma today could log in and pull it, and if someone stole grandma's credentials, that same information's out. So the idea that somehow this really sensitive stuff is safer in my chart than it is in a consumer trusted app is a fundamental misunderstanding about the problem of usernames and passwords, which is not an Epic problem. I'm not saying their software is better or worse. It's that it's relying on username and passwords. often set by the local policy. So Duke will have their own process for establishing usernames and passwords and resets and all of that. So fundamentally, that was a sort of a deceptive statement because they should have known better. That was not right. Then there was this whole thing about their intellectual property. So this is my point. When I said that the open data model that we said the 12 variables had to be January 2010 to 19, that data model that was open source, that was for the public. But it's not like these vendors are foolish. They were building their own. There's a Cerner data model, there's an Epic data model, there's a eClinicalWorks data model, and those data models, it's basically our health data, but organized in a clever way so that pharma and health plans can pay a lot of money to access it for HEDIS measures and star ratings and a bunch of things, real world evidence. So the debate is, does the country want to have an open data model for interoperability, or we want to have a private data model? And the 21st Century Cures Act, 90% bipartisan, overwhelmingly supported passed law, basically said, no, America, we're going to have a healthcare data model and it can be available by APIs. So arguing over the rule, which is simply implementing a law that had massive congressional support, is sort of backwards. If you had a concern about we want to have proprietary data models that you pay rent to access, have that debate during the congressional process where they were voting on it. That was long gone, 2016. We already voted. This is just a regulation to implement that. So that was disingenuous. And then last but not least, I feel terrible for any hospital that signed that stupid letter. Duke did not sign it. UNC did not sign it. I know and have friends of organizations who signed it, and I'm like, WTF. You're going to look like fools in history and to your board and to your neighborhood. Makes no sense. So I feel sad. It didn't do anything. The rules are happening. They're going to be live, my guess is within the next 2 weeks, and we can move to implementation, and this will be basically a footnote in lobbying case study history of what not to do.
Yes, up here.
I'll be faster in my response because I'm filibustering. I'll go quick so I can get all your questions. Eric, I was picking on you, so you get to do whatever you want.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the real blocking and tackling and rubber meeting the road when it comes to fire, because I believe in the standard. I actually love your plug analogy. In fact, I use the same one in a publication that will come out in Nature Digital Medicine about APIs. So what I would say is the state we're in right now in terms of providing the power socket for data is that a lot of the data right now, besides US CDI, which is just really about 20-some fire elements out of most of the EHRs, I would wager that a typical EHR is probably going to have thousands of elements that they want to represent as fire, but we haven't done the work to actually do that. So it's sort of like the uranium's still sitting in the mountain right now, and we need to figure out how do we incentivize. I know you talk about signals to incentivize in a commercial way this thing, but there's also workforce issues, because right now at Duke, for instance, I would wager we might have 2 people who would be capable of taking, let's say, breast cancer local regional recurrence and abstracting that into fire. So we still got a ton of work in front of us in terms of extracting the uranium out of the mountain to make that into electricity, to make that.
So the reason why I'm really leaning on Blue Cross and other plans in the state is they know the data they need to measure quality outcomes, to organize the new North Carolina social determinants model. None of those data elements are in the 20. So here's the question. Will they do custom work and have vendors get paid gajillion dollars to manipulate this one-off, which is the current path? Or will there be let's get a coalition of the willing, we'll start it with half a dozen institutions in North Carolina, invite the Rushes of Chicago, the Jeffersons of Philly, the UCSFs of whatever, and say, come to our group where we're going to get this organized, and let's give the feedback to the system so that we democratize the burden. So it's not one person at Duke in one instance of Epic doing a single mapping for one report for Blue Premier. and that's what's happening now. If we stick with that, holy waste, right? But if you do standards acceleration with feedback from CMS and others, with the state, you got Jesse here, you got all the people and all the goodwill to say, let's map out don't do the minimum floor government requirement, let's do the minimum for making healthcare great and agree and go, and the mapping and the standards. And this may be where those fire standards get deployed. I know we're in overtime, so thank you for that. But please, figure this out, people. You can do it.
All right, let's give Anish Chopra, who's going to make healthcare great.
Yeah.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Good job, brother. That was great. Love it.